The room was full of the best trained security professionals money could buy, and every single one of them was laughing. A quiet man in worn-out shoes stood at the center of that laughter. No uniform, no medals, no introduction worth giving, according to everyone present. Just a 37-year-old single father who looked like he'd wandered into the wrong building. 7 seconds later, the company's most feared bodyguard was flat on the floor, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember his own name. And the quiet man hadn't even broken a sweat. If stories like this keep you up at night, stories about forgotten warriors, buried secrets, and the kind of loyalty that costs everything, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what's coming next. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. Now settle in. This one runs deep. The application arrived at Aurelius Aerospace on a Tuesday morning in a plain white envelope with no cover letter, no professional headshot, and no LinkedIn profile attached. Just a single-page resume, typed in a font so ordinary it practically apologized for existing, listing 7 years of Navy SEAL service that ended abruptly in a line that said only, "Honorably separated, 2013. Circumstances classified." The HR coordinator who opened it almost threw it away. She didn't. Something made her pause. Maybe the blankness of it, the almost aggressive lack of self-promotion. And she forwarded it upward with a note that said, "Unusual. Thought you should see." 3 days later, Cole Bennett received a phone call while he was scraping burnt eggs off a pan in the kitchen of a 2-bedroom apartment in Richmond, Virginia. He almost didn't answer. Cole was 37 years old and looked somewhere between 40 and something older, depending on the light. Not because he'd aged badly, he hadn't particularly, but because there was a quality to his stillness that belonged to men who had carried things for a long time without putting them down. Medium height, wide through the shoulders in a way that dress shirts never quite accommodated, dark hair going gray at the temples, which he didn't bother to address, hands that were slightly too large, with old scars across the knuckles that he'd long stopped noticing. He had a daughter named Maya, who was 15 and smarter than most adults he'd ever met, and a 2009 Honda CR-V with one working rear window and a lease on an apartment whose radiator made a sound every February like a dying animal. He had a job doing contract security at a downtown office complex that paid enough to cover the basics if he was careful, which he always was. He did not have a resume posted anywhere. He had not applied for a job in 3 years. He had, very deliberately, constructed a life with a low profile and a small footprint, because those were the only conditions under which the past stayed where he needed it to stay. So when the woman from Aurelius Aerospace called and introduced herself and mentioned the envelope, Cole's first response was a long silence. "We didn't apply," he said finally. "The application was submitted under your name, with your service record attached." Another silence. He already knew. Maya had been using his laptop the previous weekend to work on a school project, or so she'd claimed. He thought about the way she'd left the browser history cleared and hadn't quite met his eyes at dinner that night. "Mr. Bennett, the trial evaluation is this Friday. We'd like you to attend." Cole looked at the burnt eggs. He looked at the cracked tile above the stove that he'd been meaning to fix for 8 months. He thought about his daughter, who was 15 and believed in him with a ferocity that sometimes made him feel like the most fraudulent man alive. "What time?" he said. "Oh." Aurelius Aerospace occupied the top 4 floors of a glass and steel tower in the financial district that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a month. Elena Ashcroft had taken the company from a mid-tier defense contractor to a legitimate aerospace innovator in 6 years, and the building reflected that ascent. Clean lines, serious money, the kind of corporate architecture designed to communicate permanence. Cole arrived 11 minutes early, which was a habit. He wore his one good blazer over a dark shirt, and he had polished his shoes the night before, though they were still clearly old. He signed in at the front desk, rode the elevator to the 14th floor, and found his way to the large conference room where the evaluation was being held. There were 14 other candidates. Cole took one look at them and understood immediately why his application had been unusual. These were men from military contractor firms, private security agencies, former Secret Service, former Special Operations, men in expensive suits with firm handshakes and the kind of practiced alertness that had been trained into them in courses and then reinforced on LinkedIn. They had business cards. 2 of them had assistants waiting downstairs. The man running the evaluation introduced himself as Director Harlan Cross, head of corporate security for Aurelius Aerospace. He was tall, early 50s, with the military bearing of someone who had served and never fully left it behind. He reviewed the candidate list on his tablet without looking up. "Bennett," he said when he reached the name. "Here." Cross looked up. His eyes moved over Cole. The worn shoes, the older blazer, the absence of any visible credential holder or security badge. Lanyard. And something flickered in his expression that wasn't quite contempt, but was close enough to be its cousin. Prior service? Navy, 7 years. Separated when? 2013. And since then? Contract security, office buildings, event venues, some private work. The room had gotten quiet in the particular way rooms get quiet when people are pretending not to listen. Cole didn't look around. He watched Cross, who was watching him with the expression of a man trying to decide whether this was a mistake that could be corrected quickly. "Mr. Bennett," Cross said carefully, "this position requires elite-level protection experience. The security evaluation today is—" "I read the brief," Cole said. "I'm familiar with the requirements." Cross held his gaze for a moment longer, then moved on. The man 3 seats to Cole's left leaned slightly toward the candidate beside him and said something in a voice just quiet enough to be deniable. Both men smiled. Cole didn't react. He'd heard it clearly. Wrong zip code. And he filed it away the way he filed most things, without emotion and without forgetting. The evaluation began with a written tactical assessment, which Cole completed in 12 minutes while the others were still on page 2. Then a scenario simulation, which involved reviewing footage of a staged event and identifying security weaknesses. Cole identified 9. The next highest total was 4. Then came the physical component. The room shifted when they moved to the evaluation space. A cleared area in the adjacent gymnasium, mats on the floor, corporate HR observers stationed at the corners with clipboards. This was where the mood among the other candidates changed in a specific direction. Physical testing, Cole had noticed over the years, was when men who were unsure of other things became very sure of themselves. The evaluation was supposed to be a controlled assessment, reaction time, defensive technique, controlled engagement. It was not supposed to become what it became. Damian Rourke made that decision. Rourke was Aurelius Aerospace's current head of executive protection, and he wasn't being evaluated. He was observing, technically. He was 32, built like a man who spent meaningful portions of his life in the gym, with the easy confidence of someone who had never seriously lost a fight and had allowed this fact to shape his personality in ways he was probably unaware of. He had a following among the junior security staff, the kind of informal authority that comes from physical dominance in environments where physical dominance matters. He watched Cole step onto the mat with an expression that started as amusement and graduated to something more performative when he sensed the room watching him. "Hold on," Rourke said, stepping forward. "I want to see something." Cross frowned. "Damian, 5 minutes." Rourke was already rolling his shoulders, already positioning himself. He looked at Cole with a smile that had too many teeth in it. "You don't mind, do you? Just a demonstration. Help the team get a sense of your capabilities." Cole looked at him. Not up. They were close to the same height, but there was something directional about Cole's gaze, something that moved from Rourke's face down to his feet and back up in a way that was entirely without aggression and somehow more unsettling because of it. "Sure," Cole said. Director Cross had his mouth open to stop it. Elena Ashcroft, who had come down from the executive floor to observe the final phase of the evaluation, stood near the doorway with her tablet under her arm. She was 30 years old and had the focused, slightly impatient quality of someone whose mind moved faster than most conversations could keep up with. She watched Rourke position himself on the mat and felt a flicker of something she'd describe later, privately, as a bad feeling she should have acted on. She didn't act on it. She watched. Rourke came in fast because that was his strategy. Controlled aggression, early pressure, established dominance before the other person could think. He was good at it. He'd used it successfully against men with considerably more apparent physical capability than the quiet guy in the old blazer. Cole moved. It wasn't a dramatic movement. That was what people would say afterward, the ones who tried to reconstruct it. There was no visible wind-up, no telegraphing. One moment Rourke was moving forward, and the next there was a sequence of very small, precise things. A shift of weight, a change in the angle of contact, something that involved Rourke's own momentum. Being redirected through geometry, Cole seemed to understand in a way that bypassed conscious thought entirely. And then Rourke was on the floor. Not stumbling, not catching himself. On the floor, flat, with a sound like a heavy door closing. The room did not make a sound. 7 seconds had passed. Cole stood in the same general area where he'd been standing before. His breathing was unchanged. He straightened the lapel of his blazer with 2 fingers. Rourke lay still for a moment, then rolled to his side and sat up slowly, blinking, with the expression of a man who was trying very hard to understand what had happened to him. Cole didn't look at him again. He turned to the room, to the observers with their clipboards, to the other candidates who were no longer pretending not to watch, to Director Cross, who had the expression of a man rapidly revising his assumptions, and said, in a voice that carried without being raised, "How many of you were watching the door while that was happening?" Silence. The CEO of this company has been standing in that doorway for the last 4 minutes, during a physical altercation, with no one between her and the room. Everyone turned. Elena Ashcroft stood exactly where she'd been standing, tablet still under her arm, now with an expression that Cole would later recognize as the one she wore when she was paying very close attention. "That," Cole said, "is a security failure, not him." He glanced briefly at Rourke, still sitting on the mat. "The spectacle. That's the oldest distraction in the world, and every trained professional in this room just fell for it." He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd laid it, folded it over his arm, and looked at Cross. "That's my demonstration." Well, Cross called a 15-minute recess. Cole stood near the window at the end of the hallway, watching the street 11 floors below, and didn't particularly think about anything. He had spent years cultivating the ability to not particularly think about anything in moments of waiting. It was useful. He heard footsteps, measured, purposeful, the footsteps of someone who moved like they had somewhere to be, and didn't turn around until Elena Ashcroft was standing beside him, close enough that it was clearly intentional. "That was either the most impressive thing I've seen in 6 years running this company," she said, "or the most reckless." "Probably both," Cole said. She looked at him directly. She had dark eyes and the focused quality of someone who filtered for signal constantly and was good at it. "What was the point? Demonstrating the door?" "The point was the door." "You could have mentioned it. You didn't need to put Rourke on the floor first." Cole considered that. "If I'd mentioned it, you'd have noted it. This way, you'll remember it." A short silence. Outside, traffic moved. Someone far below was arguing on a phone. "Your application said you left the Navy in 2013, Elena said. "Circumstances classified." "Yes." "That's not an answer." "It's the one that's available." She looked at him for another moment, and he had the uncomfortable sense that she was processing him the way she probably processed technical data. Not emotionally, but with genuine precision, looking for the thing that explained the shape of the information. "You have a daughter," she said. It wasn't a question. It was in the file. "Maya, 15. And you're doing this, applying for this, because of her?" Cole thought about the cleared browser history. About Maya at dinner, slightly too careful about not meeting his eyes. About what it meant that a 15-year-old girl had decided, without asking, that her father needed a push. "I'm doing this," he said, "because I'm still useful, and I'd like that to count for something before it runs out." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, "Harlan is going to offer you a temporary contract. 30 days, provisional." I heard him discussing it. "The compensation is—" "I know what the package is. It's in the brief." She almost smiled. "Not quite." "Is there anything you don't already know?" Cole looked at her, and something in his expression shifted, just slightly, just for a second, from composed to something more direct. "Yeah," he said. "I don't know who's already inside your building that you should be worried about." Elena's almost smile disappeared. "What does that mean?" Cole turned from the window. "It means the threat assessment I reviewed in your security brief identifies 8 external risk categories and 0 internal ones. That's not a security posture. That's a blind spot." He paused. "Whoever put that brief together was either poorly trained or very motivated to keep you looking in the wrong direction." Elena stared at him. "That's a significant accusation." "It's an observation," Cole said. "The accusation comes later when I find the evidence." He picked up his jacket from where he'd set it on the windowsill. "I'll take the 30 days. He drove home in the CRV with the one working rear window, and Maya was at the kitchen table doing homework when he came through the door. She looked up with the studied casualness of a teenager who had spent significant effort constructing the appearance of not waiting. "How'd it go?" she said. Cole set his keys on the counter. He looked at his daughter, her mother's jaw, his eyes, her own particular quality of focused attention that sometimes caught him off guard because it didn't come from either of them exactly. "You cleared my browser history," he said. Maya's expression remained neutral with visible effort. "I don't know what you're talking about." Aurelius Aerospace's application portal saves form data in the session cache. You had to clear the whole history to wipe it. A pause. Then, with the sigh of someone abandoning a position, "Was it really that obvious?" "Only to someone who taught you how browsers work." She put down her pencil, looked at him. "Dad, you've been doing parking garage security for 3 years. You check the same 4 floors every night. You used to—" "I know what I used to do." "Then you know this is better." Her voice wasn't apologetic. Maya didn't do apologetic when she believed she was right. I submitted the application. You got there on your own." Cole stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment, looking at his daughter who had, behind his back, given him something he hadn't known how to give himself. "I got the contract," he said. Maya's face broke open, just for a second, just briefly, into something so uncomplicated and young that it hit him somewhere behind his sternum. "How long?" 30 days. Provisional. And then?" Cole moved to the refrigerator, opened it, looked at the contents without seeing them. "And then we'll see," he said. But standing there in the small kitchen of the apartment with the broken radiator and the cracked tile he'd never fixed, for the first time in a long time, Cole Bennett was thinking past tomorrow. He was also thinking about what he'd said to Elena Ashcroft in that hallway, about blind spots and missing internal risk assessments, and the particular way the threat brief had been constructed to direct attention outward. He was thinking about who benefits when the guards are watching the door. And somewhere deep in the muscle memory of everything he had once been, something old and precise and dangerous was slowly waking up. Cole started on a Monday. He arrived at Aurelius Aerospace at 6:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before his contract officially began, and spent those 13 minutes standing in the lobby watching the security desk. The guard on the early shift was a heavy-set man named Portis, who signed in visitors without looking at their faces, kept his radio volume too low to hear clearly, and had positioned his monitor at an angle that blocked his view of the east entrance. These were not catastrophic failures individually. Stacked together, they were the kind of layered negligence that made incidents possible. Cole didn't say anything about it that morning. He noted it, filed it, and moved on. He had learned a long time ago that telling people what they were doing wrong was considerably less effective than letting them watch what right looked like and making them want it. Director Harlan Cross met him on the 14th floor at 7 sharp and walked him through the existing security structure with the slightly stiff manner of a man showing someone around a house he wasn't sure he wanted to sell. The structure was extensive: cameras, badge access, rotating patrol schedules, 2-person escort protocol for Elena during off-site travel. And on paper it looked solid. Cross clearly believed in it. He spoke about it with the pride of someone who had built it carefully over several years. Cole listened. He asked 4 questions. Cross's answers to 3 of them were confident and detailed. His answer to the 4th, who has administrative access to the scheduling system for executive movements, was a pause that lasted about a second too long before Cross said, the senior security team and HR for coordination. How many people is that? 11, 12. Standard distribution. Cole nodded as if that answered it, because it did answer it, just not in the direction Cross was assuming. 12 people with access to Elena Ashcroft's daily schedule, her travel routes, her vehicle assignments, her emergency protocols. 12 people, and apparently no audit trail for who accessed what and when. Cole had seen worse. He'd worked in environments that made this look like a vault, but he had never seen worse and called it acceptable. He didn't say any of this to Cross. He asked for a desk with a terminal, a copy of the access logs going back 18 months, and a list of every security incident, however minor, that had been reported during that period. Cross looked at him the way a man looks at a dinner guest who is asked to see the kitchen. That's a significant amount of internal data for a provisional contractor. I understand, Cole said. I'll wait while you decide. Cross decided. It took most of the morning and involved a phone call to Elena, whose answer Cole could reconstruct from the expression on Cross's face when he came back. The access logs and incident reports were on Cole's desk by noon. He spent the first week reading. Not dramatically. He wasn't one of those people who covered walls with strings and photographs, constructing elaborate visual webs of suspicion. He sat at the desk in the small office they'd given him on the 12th floor, and he read and he made notes in a small spiral notebook in handwriting so compressed it would have been illegible to anyone but him, and he thought. The incident reports, individually, were nothing. A tailgating event in the parking structure in March. A suspicious vehicle logged near the rear exit in June that turned out to be a food delivery driver with a bad GPS. A minor system intrusion flagged by IT in August. Low severity, quickly resolved, attributed to a phishing attempt on a junior employee's account. On their own, these events had been correctly assessed as minor or unrelated. Cole stopped at the August incident. He read the IT report carefully, then read it again. The phishing attempt had come from an external IP, which was expected. What wasn't mentioned in the summary, but was buried in the raw log data, on page 11 of an appendix that the report's author had clearly not expected anyone to read, was that the compromised account had accessed the executive scheduling system for 47 minutes before IT detected the intrusion and locked it down. 47 minutes. Cole sat with that for a while. He pulled the executive schedule for the 2 weeks following the August incident. Then he pulled the incident log for the same period. On September 3rd, Elena's motorcade to a board meeting in Alexandria had been rerouted by a last-minute traffic advisory, standard procedure, and the alternate route had experienced a minor mechanical incident involving a vehicle that had been illegally parked across a service road. The vehicle had been towed before police arrived, no owner ever identified. Cole read the tow report, then looked at the rerouting advisory, then looked at the alternate route on the building's internal navigation system. The alternate route had been selected automatically by the system based on pre-programmed protocols. The protocols were in the scheduling system, the system that had been accessed for 47 minutes in August. He put down his pen. He looked at the wall, which was blank because he hadn't put anything on it. He thought about what he was seeing, and he was careful to think about it cleanly, without rushing to the conclusion that wanted to form, because rushing was how you got the wrong answer and then built a case for it. But the shape was there. Someone had gone into that system and read it, read the protocols, read the procedures, read the fallback routes. And 2 weeks later, a situation had been created that should have triggered exactly those procedures. The vehicle blocking the service road was deniable. The traffic advisory was real. The reroute was automatic. Every individual piece was explainable. Cole turned to the next incident, and the next, and the one after that. By the end of the week, he had found 7. He asked to meet with Elena on Friday afternoon. She came down to his office rather than summoning him up, which he hadn't expected and which told him something about how she operated. She stood in the doorway of the small room, looked at the orderly desk and the single notebook and the complete absence of dramatic wall mapping, and said, "You don't look like a man who's found anything." "Sit down," Cole said. She raised an eyebrow at the instruction but sat down in the chair across from his desk. She had a coffee she'd brought from the executive floor, and she set it on the corner of the desk without asking, which told him something else. Cole opened the notebook and turned it toward her. She looked at the compressed handwriting and then looked at him. "Walk me through it," she said. He did. Methodically, starting with the August intrusion, moving through each of the 7 incidents he'd identified, laying out the pattern. He didn't editorialize. He just showed her the sequence, the timing, the connective tissue between events that had been assessed as unrelated because no one had been looking for connections. Elena listened without interrupting. She had her hands folded on the desk and her eyes on him the whole time. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How many people in this building have you told this to?" she said. "You're the first." "Including Harlan?" "Including Harlan." A short silence. "You don't trust him." "I don't trust anyone with access to that scheduling system until I understand the access pattern better. That's not personal to Harlan. It's arithmetic." Elena looked at the notebook again. "You said 7 incidents. That's over 18 months. That I found. The log data before that period isn't fully preserved. Standard overwrite cycle. So there could be more." "I'd assume there are." This has been a long time in development. Cole paused. Whoever is doing this, they're not rushing. They're building something. Every incident tests a response. How fast does security react? What protocols activate? What the fail-safes look like? They're mapping us, Elena said. It wasn't a question. They're mapping you. The company is the vehicle. You're the target. Something moved through her expression. Not fear exactly, but the recalibration of someone who has just been told a truth they'd been avoiding the edge of without naming it. She picked up her coffee and didn't drink it. There was a board meeting in November, she said slowly. The route was changed last minute. Marcus, my chief of staff, told me there was construction on the original road. There was construction, Cole said. Started the morning of the meeting. Emergency permit, filed 72 hours prior. That's too fast to organize unless you already knew what route would be selected, unless you'd read the fallback protocols and knew exactly which alternative would be triggered by a road closure on that block. Elena was quiet. Cole watched her process it, watched her move through the discomfort of understanding something you really didn't want to be true. The board meeting in November, she said finally, was the product review. We presented the preliminary data on the Helix propulsion system to 5 external investors. I know, I read the board minutes. If something had happened to me before that meeting, the meeting would have been postponed. The investors would have been uncertain. The valuation window would have shifted. Cole kept his voice level. I don't think the goal is to kill you, Ms. Ashcroft. I think that's available if necessary. But the primary objective is the company. Specifically, whoever ends up with controlling interest in Aurelius Aerospace when you're no longer able to run it. Elena set the coffee cup down with more force than she intended. It made a sharp sound in the quiet room. She looked at it, then at her hands, and then at Cole. How long do you think this has been planned? A long time, Cole said. Longer than your tenure here. The infrastructure for this kind of operation, the access points, the contingency triggers, the layers of deniability. That doesn't get built in a year. Someone started laying groundwork before you were CEO. He watched her take that in. Watched her follow the implication backward to where it led. My predecessor, she said, or someone who worked under your predecessor and understood the transition was coming. That narrows it to about 40 people. Closer to 15, Cole said. Given the level of access required. Elena looked at him. How did you get to 15? Cross-referenced the incident dates against internal access logs. Each time there was a probe, an incident that shouldn't have been possible without inside knowledge. I tracked who had accessed relevant systems in the preceding 72 hours. The same cluster of names appears in the overlap, repeatedly, across multiple incidents. Who? I'm not going to tell you that yet. She blinked. Excuse me? Because I need to be certain, and I'm not certain yet. And if I give you a name before I'm certain, the first thing that happens is that information leaves this room through channels I can't control. And the person who's been building this for years will know the walls are closing in, and then they'll accelerate. It was, Cole acknowledged privately, not the most comfortable conversation he'd had at a new job. Elena Ashcroft was not a woman accustomed to being told, I'll let you know when I'm ready, and the expression on her face confirmed this with some specificity. But she didn't push. She sat with it, and he watched her make the calculation. The same calculation smart people made when they trusted the competence of someone whose judgment they hadn't fully tested yet. And he watched her decide. What do you need? She said. 2 things. I need your travel schedule for the next 30 days to be known only to you and me. Not Cross, not your chief of staff, not your assistant. You tell them where you're going 45 minutes before departure, no earlier. That's operationally difficult, I know. It's also the only way to test whether the incidents stop. A pause. And the second thing? I need full access to the financial records for every security contractor and vendor relationship in the last 3 years. Elena frowned. That's outside your security mandate. Yes. Legal will have problems with it. Probably. She looked at him for a long moment, and he didn't fill the silence, which he'd found over the years was frequently the most important thing you could do in a silence. I'll authorize it through executive privilege, she said finally. But Cole, if you're wrong about this, if I'm wrong, you fire me and lose a 30-day contract. If I'm right and we don't move on it, You lose the company. He met her eyes. I've been wrong before. I'd rather find out sooner than later, for both our sakes. She picked up the coffee, drank it this time. Monday morning, she said. The financial access. I'll have it arranged. She stood to leave and then paused at the door. You said whoever's behind this started before I was CEO. That means they've been inside this company for years. That means I've been sitting across conference tables from them, having lunch with them. She stopped. I don't know how you function in that kind of knowing that someone close to you is. You compartmentalize, Cole said. You do the next thing. You don't let yourself think about all of it at once, because that way is the end of useful thinking. She looked at him. That sounds like experience talking. It is, he said. She left without asking what kind of experience, which he appreciated. The next 2 weeks were the kind of work that looked like nothing from the outside. Cole moved through the building with the quiet regularity of a man doing an unremarkable job, walking corridors, checking camera angles, reviewing logs, occasionally talking to the security team with the mild manner of someone gathering routine information. People stopped noticing him. That was intentional. He identified 3 additional security weaknesses in the physical infrastructure: a camera blind spot in the northeast stairwell that had existed since a camera was repositioned 18 months ago and never corrected, a badge reader on the service entrance that logged access with a 12-second delay, and a gap in the evening patrol rotation that left the server room corridor unmonitored for 4 minutes out of every hour. He corrected all 3 without announcement. The camera was repositioned. The badge reader was flagged to IT as a malfunction and repaired. The patrol schedule was quietly adjusted. He also, more carefully, began mapping the financial relationships. The records Elena authorized were extensive, and going through them took time that he largely spent between 7 and midnight in his small office with the door closed and a thermos of coffee that Maya had started packing for him in the mornings, which she presented as a purely practical gesture and which he accepted on those terms. What he found was a pattern of vendor relationships that were individually unremarkable and collectively revealing. 3 security contractors, 1 providing technical surveillance, 1 providing personnel background checks, 1 providing travel logistics, all maintained service agreements with Aurelius Aerospace that had been renewed automatically, without competitive review, for 7 years. All 3 had been established under the previous administration. All 3 charged rates that were slightly, consistently above market, not enough to trigger a budget audit, enough to matter over 7 years. Cole pulled the corporate registration records for each contractor. 2 were straightforward. The third, a logistics firm called Sentinel Route Advisors, was registered in Delaware through a holding company, which was registered in Nevada through a second holding company, which had a principal officer listed as a man named Arthur Vance. Cole sat with that name for a long time. He knew it. He knew it from somewhere that predated Aurelius Aerospace, somewhere older and further back, and he couldn't place it immediately, which bothered him the way any gap in recall bothered him, with a focused, sustained discomfort that didn't let him stop pulling at it. He wrote the name in the notebook. He underlined it. He moved on to the next record, and then the next, and every 40 minutes or so he glanced at the name again. The way you look at something that isn't where it's supposed to be, knowing eventually you'll remember where it belongs. I and Elena had developed, by the end of the second week, a working relationship that was more efficient than comfortable, which was the right kind. She had a habit of coming down to his office at odd hours, late afternoon, or once at 7 in the evening when she was still at the building, and asking questions that were never quite about security and never quite not about it. The Helix Project, she said one evening, standing at the window of his office the way he'd stood at the window on the day they'd talked in the hallway. How much do you know about what it actually is? Propulsion system, revolutionary efficiency rating, worth a significant amount to the right buyer. The right buyer. She said it with a particular flatness. We've had 3 separate attempts to access the technical files in the last 6 months. IT caught 2 of them. The third one, she paused. The third one, they didn't catch. We only found out because the file access timestamp didn't match the employee's logged hours. Cole looked up from the notebook. Which employee? He was gone by the time we investigated. Quit 2 weeks before we found it. Clean resignation, 2 weeks notice, no red flags. She turned from the window. I had HR review his full employment record. He'd been here 4 years. Impeccable file. But when I looked at when he was hired, another pause, it was 3 months after I became CEO, which means someone placed him. I think so. I can't prove it. What was his role? Junior systems analyst, low access clearance, officially. Except someone had granted him a temporary elevated access credential 8 months ago for a server migration project. She looked at him steadily. The credential was supposed to expire in 30 days. It didn't. Who authorized the extension? The authorization ticket was filed by a user account that IT says has been inactive for 2 years. Cole put down the pen. A ghost account. Filed paperwork, approved a credential, vanished. Elena sat down, not in the visitor's chair, but on the edge of the desk, close to where the notebook was, which was a different kind of informality than she'd used before. This is bigger than corporate espionage, isn't it? Yes, Cole said. I think it's a takeover, engineered to look like a series of unrelated problems that culminate in a leadership crisis. When the board loses confidence, there will be someone ready with a restructuring proposal. And inside that proposal will be the mechanism that shifts control. Elena was very still. You're describing something that required years of setup, relationships with people inside my company, inside previous administrations, enough capital to sustain a long operation. She looked at him. Who has that kind of patience? Someone who doesn't need a quick return. Someone who's been waiting because they knew the asset would appreciate. Cole paused. The Helix system. When's the public unveiling? 43 days. That's the timeline, Cole said. Whatever they're planning, it moves before the unveiling, because after the unveiling, the valuation locks in and the acquisition window closes. 43 days. He looked at the name in the notebook, Arthur Vance, and the memory that had been hovering at the edge of identification suddenly snapped into place with the particular clarity of something you've been trying to remember, the kind that arrives not when you're reaching for it, but when you've stopped. Arthur Vance. Cole had heard that name 11 years ago, in a debrief room on a naval installation, spoken by an investigator who was explaining to Cole why his SEAL team's classified route intel had been compromised on a mission in which 2 men had died and Cole's career had ended. The investigator had said the leak traced to a private intelligence contractor whose principal officer had already disappeared, a man who had no verified face, no verified location, and a corporate trail that dissolved into holding companies. A man named Arthur Vance. Cole sat in the quiet of his small office on the 12th floor of Aurelius Aerospace, with his thermos of coffee and his compressed notebook, and understood that he had not stumbled into a corporate conspiracy. He had walked back into the outer edge of something that had been following him for 11 years without either of them knowing the other was still in the game. He picked up the pen. He didn't write anything. He sat with the weight of the recognition, not dramatically, not with the shaking hands of a man confronting destiny, just with the flat, cold attention of someone who has found the shape of the problem and is starting to think about what it will actually cost to solve it. Then he wrote 3 words under Arthur Vance's name, still in operation. He capped the pen. He picked up the thermos. The coffee was still warm enough, barely, and he drank it standing up, looking at nothing in particular, which was what he did when he needed to think without knowing yet what he was thinking toward. Through the ceiling above him, 14 floors up, Elena Ashcroft was sitting at her desk at 8 in the evening, working on a propulsion system that was going to change aerospace economics if she could hold her company together long enough to show it to the world. Cole was going to make sure she could. He just needed to not get both of them killed in the process, which was, as goals went, easier stated than achieved. The photographs appeared on a Wednesday morning, which Cole would later think was deliberate, Wednesday being the midpoint of the week, far enough from Monday that the news cycle had room to breathe, close enough to Friday that the damage could compound through the weekend without a full business day for damage control. Whoever had chosen the timing understood media rhythm. That told him something. He found out the way everyone else did. His phone lit up at 6:14 in the morning while he was making coffee in the apartment kitchen, a text from a number he didn't recognize that contained a link and nothing else. He clicked it out of the reflex of someone who checks unknowns before deciding whether to act on them. The link went to a major national news aggregator. The headline read, "Aurelius CEO's judgment under scrutiny as personal relationship with security contractor raises board concerns." Below it were 4 photographs. Cole looked at the photographs for a long time. They were not fabricated from nothing. That was the first thing he understood, because fabricated photographs had a quality that trained eyes could detect, and these didn't have it. They were real photographs of real moments, taken with a long lens from a significant distance, and then framed and captioned to mean something they didn't mean. The first showed Cole and Elena standing at the window of his office on the 12th floor. The evening 2 weeks ago when she'd sat on the edge of his desk, and they'd talked about Arthur Vance, though he didn't know yet that she'd come close enough to the window that a telephoto lens from the building across the street could have reached them. They were facing each other. Elena's posture, cropped from context, looked different from what it had been, which was a CEO standing at a window discussing a conspiracy against her company. The second photograph was of them in the parking structure 10 days ago, when Cole had walked her to her car after a late meeting because the revised protocol required it. He was standing close. He was always standing close in those moments, because that was the job. And she had turned to say something, and he had bent his head slightly to hear her. Distance, compressed by a telephoto lens, looked different from what it was. The third and fourth were from the lobby. Different days, different moments of proximity that were entirely professional and entirely unremarkable to anyone who had been present. He put the phone down on the counter and stood in the kitchen for a moment. The coffee was ready. He poured a cup and didn't drink it. Then he picked up the phone and called Elena. She answered on the second ring, which told him she was already awake and had already seen it. "I know," she said, before he could speak. "Are you at the building?" "I'm in the car. Marcus called 20 minutes ago." The board chair called while Marcus was still on the line. Her voice was controlled in the way that voices get controlled when the person has spent the last 20 minutes actively controlling it. 3 board members have already requested an emergency meeting. "Don't call it yet," Cole said. "Give me until noon." Elena, give me until noon." A pause. He could hear traffic in the background of her car. "The story's already on 4 major outlets," she said. "By noon it'll be on 12. "I know, give me until noon anyway." Another pause. Then, "What are you going to do?" "Find out who was in the building across the street with a telephoto lens on at least 4 separate occasions. And find out who paid for the photographs to be distributed." He picked up his coffee finally. "Don't talk to the board until you hear from me. Harlan's going to want to. Don't talk to Harlan either." The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when someone wants to push back and is deciding whether the situation warrants trusting instead. "Until noon," Elena said. "Then I have to respond to something, Cole. I don't have a choice." "I know." He hung up. He drank the coffee standing at the counter, looking at nothing, thinking about telephoto lenses and timing and the specific patience required to surveil 4 separate moments over 2 weeks, and then release all 4 photographs simultaneously for maximum narrative coherence. This wasn't reactive. This was scheduled. Someone had been waiting for the right accumulation of imagery and then deployed it as a package. That level of operational discipline meant Arthur Vance wasn't panicking. He was executing. Cole rinsed the cup, grabbed his jacket, and was in the CRV by 6:34 SAD. Maya was still asleep when he left, which was normal for 6:30 on a Wednesday. He'd been leaving early for weeks now, and she'd adjusted without complaint, which was her way. She absorbed changes and adapted, and rarely asked him to explain himself. Maybe because she'd learned early that the explanations were often things she didn't entirely want to know. He thought about her on the drive in, the way he often thought about her in cars, which was the place where his mind moved most freely. He thought about the fact that she was 15 and largely self-sufficient in the practical sense. She got herself to school, she made her own lunch most days, she'd been managing her own schedule since she was 12, with a competence that sometimes made him proud and sometimes made him aware of how much she'd compensated for his inadequacies as a present parent. She was fine, she was more than fine. She was the best thing he'd done in the last 10 years, which was a low bar in some ways and a very high one in others. He parked in the Aurelius garage, swiped through security, and took the stairs to the 12th floor. Before he reached his office, he turned left instead of right and went to the building management office on 11, where he asked the facilities manager, a tired-looking woman named Sheila, who'd been there longer than almost anyone, which offices in the building directly across the street were currently leased and by whom. Sheila pulled the public directory. "We don't manage that building," she said. "I know. I need the public directory." She gave him a look that suggested she had more interesting things to do but recognized he was not going to leave, and pulled it up on her terminal. Cole scanned the tenant list. 3 floors of the building across the street had clear sight lines to his 12th floor office window. 1 floor was occupied by an accounting firm, 1 by a medical billing company. The third, the 11th floor, directly opposite, was listed as having been leased to a corporate entity called Meridian Consulting Services for the past 5 months. 5 months. He'd been at Aurelius for less than 4 weeks, which meant whoever had leased that space had done so before Cole arrived, before he became a variable in the situation. Which meant the surveillance across the street had been set up to watch Elena's building generally, not specifically to watch Cole. His arrival had simply provided the opportunity, a man standing close to a woman in a window, that someone had been waiting to exploit when the moment called for it. Cole went back upstairs and made a call to a man named Dex Holloway, who was a former naval intelligence analyst who now ran a private information services firm in Alexandria and owed Cole 2 favors from a situation in 2019 that neither of them discussed in specific terms. He gave Dex the corporate entity name and asked for a beneficial ownership trace. "How fast?" Dex said. "Before noon." A sound from Dex's end that communicated his opinion of this timeline without requiring words. "It'll cost the second favor." "Both favors," Cole said. "Before noon." He hung up and turned to the access logs because the photographs were one problem and the board meeting was another, and behind both of them, the unchanged fact was that Arthur Vance was running a timetable and Cole had 39 days, now 38, as of this morning, before the Helix unveiling. The board chair's name was Gerald Fitch. He was 64, former finance, old money, the kind of man who wore his skepticism as a default expression and considered this a professional asset. He called Elena's direct line at 9:18 while Cole was still working through the logs, and Elena, who had ignored Cole's advice about not talking to board members by the narrow technical interpretation that Fitch had called her, not the other way around, put the call on speaker and held the phone toward Cole so he could hear. "Elena, I'll be direct," Fitch said. "The optics of this situation are—" "I understand the optics, Gerald. The photographs are being picked up nationally. By 10 this morning, you'll have financial journalists asking questions about leadership stability. 3 members of the board have already contacted me independently." "Who?" A pause. "I'm not going to—" "Who, Gerald? I need to know who's moving against me so I can—" "No one is moving against you, Elena. This is about protecting the company's position ahead of the Helix announcement. If there's any question about your judgment—" "My judgment," Elena said, and her voice had a particular edge in it that Cole recognized as the controlled version of real anger, "has grown this company's valuation by 400% in 6 years. My judgment built the Helix project from a theoretical framework to a viable product. My judgment—" "Elena." Fitch's voice was not unkind, which was somehow more frustrating. "No one is questioning your professional record, but the timing—" "The timing," Cole said. A short silence. Fitch clearly hadn't known someone else was on the line. "Who is that?" Fitch said. "Cole Bennett, head of executive protection." Cole kept his voice flat and professional. "Mr. Fitch, the timing of the photographs, released this morning, 3 days before the board's quarterly review, is relevant to your assessment of the situation. I'm not sure a security contractor's opinion on media strategy is. It's not about media strategy. It's about the pattern of incidents that have been targeting Ms. Ashcroft and Aurelius Aerospace for at least 18 months. The photographs aren't a scandal. They're an operational step." Cole paused. "Someone is trying to create a leadership crisis before the Helix unveiling because that's the moment they need to move. I have documentation on 6 prior incidents that follow the same pattern. I'd like the opportunity to present that documentation to the board before any emergency meeting is called." Another silence. Longer this time. "What kind of documentation?" Fitch said. "Financial records, access logs, corporate registration traces that connect several incidents directly to a single coordinating entity." Cole glanced at the clock on his desk. "I'll have additional material by noon." Fitch was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'll delay the emergency meeting until 2 o'clock, he said finally. "That's the best I can do. 3 board members are traveling and they need enough notice to—" "2 o'clock is enough," Cole said. "Thank you, Mr. Fitch." Elena ended the call and looked at Cole across the desk. "You bought us 6 hours, she said. I bought you 6 hours. What you do with them depends partly on what Dex finds me. Who's Dex? Someone who's very good at following corporate paper trails. Cole turned back to the logs. Go up to your office. Act normal. If journalists call, no comment through legal. If board members call, you're preparing documentation for the 2 o'clock meeting and you'll see them there. Elena stood. She picked up her phone, looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone calculating the distance between where they were and where they needed to be. Cole, she said. Yeah. If this doesn't work, if the board moves to suspend me pending review, the Helix project gets frozen, the unveiling gets postponed indefinitely, and whoever is behind this gets exactly what they need. I know. I just want to make sure you understand what's at stake. It's not just me. He looked up at her. I understand. Go to your office. Dex called at 11:47. Meridian Consulting Services, Dex said without preamble, is a Delaware shell. Beneficial ownership ultimately traces to a Cayman entity called Vance Strategic Holdings, LLC. Principal officer listed as 1. Arthur Vance, no verified personal address. Known corporate activity in 6 states and 2 territories over the past 14 years. A pause. Cole, that name is in my files from something I worked on in... I know, Cole said. Send me everything you have. All of it. This is a significant operation, Dex said. Whoever this guy is, he's been running long-game corporate plays for a long time. Aurelius isn't his first. What else has he hit? 2 that I can document. A pharmaceutical company in 2015, leadership ousted, hostile acquisition 6 months later. A defense tech firm in 2018, CEO resigned under a personal misconduct allegation that was later found to be fabricated, but the company had already been restructured by then. Dex stopped. The allegation in 2018, Cole. It was also photographs. Cole was very still. Same playbook, he said. Same playbook. Different players, same moves. Dex's voice had the careful quality of someone delivering information they're not entirely sure the recipient is ready for. The defense tech firm in 2018, before it was restructured, it had a government contract related to classified route security for military operations. Cole didn't say anything. He was doing the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was bad and getting worse. Send me everything, he said. Now. He had the files by 11:58. He printed what he needed, selectively, specifically, enough to build a clear narrative for a boardroom full of people who were not security professionals and needed it simple and fast. He organized the documentation into a coherent sequence. He was good at this, at building a case that moved a room from skepticism to understanding without losing them in the technical details. He was halfway through organizing the stack when his personal cell phone buzzed. Not the work phone, his personal cell, the number he'd had for 6 years, the number that only a few people had. The text was from a number he didn't recognize. It said, "Your daughter left school at 11:30. She's at the coffee shop on Mercer. She's fine. For now." Cole read the text 3 times. He put the phone down on the desk. He picked it up again. He read it again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less than what they were. Then he called Maya's cell phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He called the school. An administrative assistant with a pleasant professional voice confirmed that Maya Bennett had signed herself out at 11:28 with a note indicating a medical appointment. The note had been submitted through the online parental portal that morning. Cole had not submitted any note. He stood up from his desk. He had the documentation for the board meeting in his left hand and his car keys in his right hand, and 38 days until the Helix unveiling and a 2 o'clock meeting that could determine whether Elena kept her company, and his daughter was at a coffee shop on Mercer Street being observed by people who were sending him text messages about it. He stood there for a moment in the specific paralysis of a man being pulled in 2 directions with equal, legitimate force. Then he called Elena. "The board meeting," he said when she picked up. "The documentation is on my desk. Everything is labeled. The sequence is, the August intrusion is the starting point, then the September reroute, then the access credential extension. The Vance connection is in the blue folder on the right side of the stack. Dex Holloway's contact information is on the top sheet. He'll testify to the corporate trace if Fitch needs a live source." A short silence. "Cole, what's happening?" "I have to leave the building for a while." The board meeting is at 2. I know. Another silence, longer. He could hear her breathing, hear her processing the fact that he was saying this. That Cole Bennett, who had reorganized his entire professional existence around not repeating the mistake of walking away, was telling her he had to walk away from a 2 o'clock meeting that both their futures might depend on. Your daughter, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Yeah. Go, she said immediately, without hesitation, and the immediacy of it hit him somewhere he hadn't expected. Go right now. I'll handle the board. Elena, I have the documentation. I have Fitch's number. I have 6 years of making arguments in that room that no one thought I could win. Her voice was steady. I'm 30 years old, Cole. I'm not helpless. Go get your daughter. He was already moving toward the door. I'll be back before 2, he said. Don't make promises you can't keep, she said. Just go. The coffee shop on Mercer was 4 blocks from Maya's school, a small independent place with fogged windows and mismatched chairs that Maya had mentioned once as somewhere she went to study. Cole parked half a block away and went in through the front, because going in through the back would have been visible preparation, and he didn't want to trigger anything before he understood the situation. Maya was at a corner table with a laptop open and headphones around her neck, which was exactly how she looked when she was studying, except that she was not studying. She was watching the door, and when she saw Cole come in, the expression on her face moved through relief and guilt in quick succession before settling on something that was trying to look calm. Cole sat down across from her. He looked at her face, then at the laptop, then at the street outside the window. Who asked you to come here? He said quietly. Maya's jaw tightened. Nobody. Maya. She looked at him. He waited. Someone texted me, she said finally, from a number I didn't know. They said there was a family emergency and you needed me to come here. When? About 11. I know I shouldn't have left school without calling you, but the text said it was urgent and you weren't answering. I was in a meeting. My phone was... Cole stopped. He'd had his phone on silent during the morning documentation review. Did you text me back after you got here? 3 times. You didn't answer. She looked at him with the expression she wore when she was holding something back that wanted to come out differently. Dad, what's going on? He looked at the window again. Across the street, a man in a gray jacket was reading a newspaper in a way that nobody actually reads newspapers anymore. He'd been standing in approximately the same position since Cole arrived. Someone wanted to get you out of school, Cole said, and then they texted me to tell me where you were. Maya was quiet for a moment. They wanted to pull you away from something, she said. Not a question. She'd inherited his capacity for pattern recognition, which was sometimes useful and sometimes uncomfortable. The board meeting is at 2, Cole said. It decides whether the CEO keeps her company. Maya looked at him steadily. And they needed you away from that. Yes. So they used me. She said it without drama, just flat acknowledgement of a fact that she was apparently already assembling. Because they knew you'd leave. Cole didn't answer, because the answer was obvious, and they both knew it. Maya stopped, started again. That's what they're doing, isn't it? They're not fighting you directly. They can't fight you directly because you're better at that. So they're using the thing you care about most. She looked at him with her mother's jaw in his eyes, and something entirely her own. They're trying to make you the weapon that destroys you. Cole sat with that for a moment. His 15-year-old daughter had just articulated the precise operational logic of what Arthur Vance was doing in about 40 words. Yeah, he said, that's what they're doing. Then don't let them, Maya said. Go back. I'm not leaving you here. Take me with you, or call someone to sit with me, or take me home and lock the door. She leaned forward slightly. Dad, I'm fine. Nobody in this coffee shop is going to do anything to me in public. They needed me out of school so they could text you. The text already worked. You left the building. That's what they wanted. She paused. But you came here in... She glanced at the time on her laptop. 16 minutes. And now you know where I am, and that I'm okay. So the thing they used to pull you away is gone. Cole looked at his daughter. She looked back at him with the focused patience of someone who knew they were right and was waiting for the other person to catch up. You're 15, he said. I know how old I am, Maya said. He almost smiled. Not quite. He thought about the paralysis he'd felt standing at his desk with the documentation in one hand and the car keys in the other. He thought about the mission in 2013, the moment he'd made the wrong call. Not because he was afraid, but because he'd let the weight of one situation override the judgment that the other situation required. He'd walked away from the thing that needed him most, and 2 people had died, and his career had ended, and he'd spent 11 years building a smaller, quieter life that was safe for Maya and not much else. I was not going to repeat that. He understood now, sitting in a coffee shop on Mercer Street, that the moment you let someone turn your greatest fear into a weapon, you've already lost the fight they're trying to win. "Come on," Cole said. He stood, pulled out his phone, and typed a quick text to the number that had contacted him. "She's safe. So is the meeting. Tell Vance he overplayed." He didn't expect a response. He sent it anyway because Vance had been running long games for a long time and deserved to know that someone on the other side understood the board he was playing on. "Where are we going?" Maya said, gathering her laptop. "I'm taking you to the building. You'll wait in the security office on 12 while I'm in the board meeting." He held the door for her. "And then I'm going to need you to tell me everything about the text you received, the exact time, the exact wording, whether it arrived as a link or plain text." "It was plain text. Came at 10:52. She walked beside him toward this car. The number had a 703 area code. "Northern Virginia. I already looked it up. It's registered to a burner purchased at a pharmacy in Fairfax County 6 weeks ago." Cole stopped walking. He looked at his daughter. "How do you know that?" he said. Maya looked slightly uncomfortable. "There are lookup services. Some of them are free. Some of them are," she paused, "less free." "Maya, you taught me how to investigate things. You literally taught me." She met his eyes. "I was going to tell you when you arrived. I wasn't just sitting there waiting." Cole resumed walking toward the car. He didn't say anything for half a block. "Fairfax County," he said finally. "Fairfax County," Maya confirmed. "Purchased 6 weeks ago. That's before the photographs were released. Which means whoever planned this was thinking about a contingency that involved me before they even made the first move." 6 weeks ago. Before the photographs. Before Cole had found the Vance connection in the financial records. Before any of the overt escalation. Someone had purchased a burner phone 6 weeks ago specifically to use against Cole's daughter when the time came, which meant the contingency had been built into the operation from the beginning, which meant Cole had been identified as a threat from the moment he walked into that evaluation on a Friday morning in worn-out shoes and put Damian Rourke on the floor in 7 seconds. He started the car. He thought about the man in the gray jacket across the street from the coffee shop, who was probably no longer standing there. "When we get to the building," Cole said, "you stay in the security office. Door locked. You don't open it for anyone except me." "Okay," Maya said. She had her laptop on her knees and was already typing something, and Cole decided not to ask what. He pulled into traffic and drove back toward Aurelius Aerospace with 38 minutes until 2 o'clock and the accumulated weight of 11 years and a photograph of a 15-year-old girl's father standing close to a woman in a window, and the knowledge, cold and clarifying as anything he'd ever known, that Arthur Vance had been watching and waiting and planning for exactly this moment. And that he had made, 11 years ago and again this morning, the one choice Vance had not anticipated. He had come back. Cole walked into the board meeting at 1:58, with Maya locked in the security office on 12, and Dex Holloway on standby by phone and the documentation stack under his arm, and he was 2 minutes early, which under the circumstances felt like a miracle of logistics. The boardroom was on the 16th floor, a long rectangular room with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the financial district and a table that seated 18. 11 board members were present in person. 2 were on video screens mounted at the far end of the table. Gerald Fitch sat at the head, with the expression of a man who had been managing difficult conversations for 40 years and found this one more difficult than most. Elena was already there, seated to Fitch's left, with the documentation Cole had left on his desk organized in front of her in exactly the sequence he'd labeled it. She looked at Cole when he came in. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you've spent 2 hours not knowing if they were coming and have spent some of that time constructing the argument for why it would be all right if they didn't, and then they walk through the door. Cole sat down 3 seats away from her because 3 seats away was the position with the best sight line to all 3 entrances and the video screens simultaneously. Old habit. "Mr. Bennett," Fitch said, "I understand you wanted to address the board." "I do. Thank you for the time, Mr. Fitch." The man to Fitch's right, a board member named Philip Carver, early 60s, investment background, the one who'd been loudest in demanding the emergency meeting according to what Elena had texted Cole during his drive back, leaned forward. With respect, I'm not sure why our head of security is presenting to the board on what is fundamentally a question of executive conduct. Because it isn't a question of executive conduct, Cole said. It's a question of corporate sabotage, and I'm the person who found it. He put the documentation on the table and began. He spoke for 22 minutes. He had done enough operational briefings in enough high-stakes rooms to know how to pace information for an audience that needed to be moved from one position to another without losing them in the middle. He started with the August intrusion, concrete, documented, with timestamps, and moved through each incident in sequence, building the pattern before naming the pattern. He showed the financial connections to Sentinel Root Advisors. He showed the corporate trace to Vance Strategic Holdings. He showed the beneficial ownership chain that Dex had constructed, and he showed the parallel incidents from 2015 and 2018, the pharmaceutical company, the defense tech firm, because context was the difference between a theory and a case. When he got to the photographs, he showed the lease records for Meridian Consulting Services in the building across the street, 5 months of occupancy, predating Cole's arrival. The photographs, Cole said, were not taken to document an inappropriate relationship. They were taken to create the appearance of one at the moment it would cause maximum damage, 3 days before the quarterly board review, 38 days before the Helix unveiling. He looked at Carver specifically. Someone in this operation needed the board to question Miss Ashcroft's judgment. They needed an emergency meeting. They needed her attention divided and her authority undermined going into the most important product announcement in this company's history. The photographs are a business instrument, not a scandal. The room was quiet. Fitch had his hands folded on the table and was looking at the documentation with the careful attention of a man who has spent a career learning when something is real. Carver said, "This is a significant accusation against parties who are not present to—" "Arthur Vance is not going to be present to defend himself," Cole said. "He's been operating through shell companies and ghost accounts for 14 years precisely because direct confrontation is not how he works." He paused. "But the documentation is what it is. It doesn't require him to be in the room." "How do we know this documentation is accurate?" another board member asked. A woman named Diane Yee, mid-50s, tech background. Her skepticism was clean and professional, which Cole appreciated. Dex Holloway, corporate forensics analyst, 15 years of private intelligence, former naval intelligence, compiled the beneficial ownership trace. His contact information is on the sheet. He's available by phone right now if anyone wants to ask him questions directly. Cole looked at Yee. The access logs came from Aurelius's own servers. IT can verify the timestamps. The vendor financial records came from your own accounting system through authorization from the CEO. None of this required outside interpretation. It's your own data, organized to show you what it already showed. Diane Yee picked up the financial records and read for a moment. She turned to the Sentinel Root Advisors section. She read that. She put it down and looked at Fitch. "Gerald," she said, with a tone that communicated something specific between two people who had been in rooms together for a long time. Fitch looked at Elena. "Ms. Ashcroft, in your assessment, is there any possibility that this documentation is itself a misdirection?" Elena looked at Fitch steadily. 6 weeks ago, Gerald, someone purchased a burner phone in Fairfax County for the specific purpose of luring Cole's 15-year-old daughter out of school this morning, to pull him away from this meeting. She let that sit for a moment. That's not misdirection. That's a person who was afraid of what would happen in this room today. Fitch was quiet. Cole watched him move through the calculation. The slow, deliberate arithmetic of a man who had survived decades in boardrooms by never moving faster than the evidence warranted. I was not a stupid man, and he was not an unjust one. And the thing Cole had been counting on since 11:47 this morning was that Gerald Fitch, whatever his limitations, was not Philip Carver. He looked at Carver. Carver was looking at the table. There was a quality to his stillness that Cole had been watching since he sat down, and that he'd been turning over in the back of his mind throughout the presentation. He wasn't looking at the documentation. He hadn't asked a single specific question about the evidence itself. Only procedural questions, framing questions, the kind of questions that attempted to reposition the argument without engaging its substance. His skepticism had a shape to it that was different from Diane Yee's skepticism. Cole pulled the last document from the stack. He hadn't shown this one yet. He'd been deciding, since he organized the pile this morning, whether to use it in the meeting or hold it. He looked at it for a moment. "There's one more thing," he said. He laid the document on the table and slid it to the center. It was a corporate registration record, a very old one, from 11 years ago, for a financial consulting entity in the state of Virginia that had dissolved in 2014. This entity, Cole said, was a co-investor in Vance Strategic Holdings in 2013. It dissolved after a government contract dispute. The principal officer, he looked at Carver, was a man named Philip Carver. The room went very still. Carver looked at the document. His expression did not change as dramatically as Cole had seen guilty expressions change in other rooms, which meant either that he was a very controlled man or that he had known this moment was possible and had prepared himself for it. Cole suspected both. "That's a common name," Carver said. "The address of record matches your home address in 2013, Cole said. "The registered agent is the same firm that handles your current personal holdings. I had it verified this morning." Fitch turned slowly to look at Carver. The turn of a man who has been in the same room with someone for 7 years and is revising, in real time, what that time has meant. "Philip," Fitch said quietly. Carver was looking at the document. His jaw was tight. He was doing what people did when the ground shifted under them, and they were trying to decide whether to run or reframe, and Cole watched him move through it and recognized the moment. There was always a moment, when the decision became visible. Carver stood up. "I'm not continuing this meeting without legal counsel present." "You're welcome to call your attorney," Cole said, "but I want to note, for the record, that the evidence on the table doesn't require your participation to speak for itself." Carver looked at Cole. It was the first time he'd looked at Cole directly during the entire meeting, which was itself a kind of information. "You have no idea what you've stepped into," he said. His voice was very controlled and very quiet. "This company, this project, you think it's about Ashcroft? It's about something that was put in motion before she was CEO, before half the people in this room were involved. And you—" He stopped. "I know exactly what I've stepped into," Cole said. "I stepped into it 11 years ago on a different operation. Same architect." Carver stared at him. "You know about Vance." "I know about Vance," Cole said. "I've known since I found the financial records. What I didn't know, until just now, was how far his reach inside this board extended. 2 board members were already on their phones. Diane Yee had her phone to her ear and was speaking quietly and quickly. Fitch had not moved. He was looking at Carver with the expression of a man receiving a kind of damage that would take a long time to fully inventory. "Philip," Fitch said again. Just the name. No question in it. Carver straightened his jacket with both hands, which was what people did when they needed to do something with their hands. He picked up his phone from the table. He walked to the door of the boardroom and stopped with his hand on the handle and said, without turning around, "Whatever you think you've found, it won't be enough. You don't know the full structure." "I know enough," Cole said. "The rest is for federal investigators." Carver left. The door closed behind him. Nobody moved to stop him, because that wasn't Cole's call in a boardroom. His job was the evidence, not the arrest. And because Dex Holloway had already filed the corporate trace with 2 federal agencies that morning as a condition of his cooperation. Philip Carver would reach his car. He would possibly get 2 blocks. Cole would find out later that he got 4 before a vehicle pulled in front of him at a red light, and 2 federal agents asked him to step out. But that was later. The meeting ran for another hour and 20 minutes. It was the kind of meeting that is both extremely important and very tedious. The procedural work of assessing documentation, making phone calls to verify sources, doing the slow institutional accounting of what had been found and what it meant. Cole answered questions. Elena answered questions. Dex Holloway answered questions on speakerphone for 35 minutes in his careful, professionally weighted way, and by the end of it Diane Yee had said twice, in her clean, precise manner, that the documentation appeared credible and the board should consider its position. At 4:41, Fitch called a formal vote. Elena was confirmed in her position as CEO by 11 votes. 1 abstention. No opposing votes, because the only board member with a direct conflict of interest had walked out of the room 4 hours earlier. Elena sat at the table after the vote was recorded and looked at the table's surface for a moment, and Cole watched her absorb it. The particular kind of exhaustion that comes after you've been holding something together by force of will and the force is no longer required. She blinked. She pressed her lips together. She picked up her phone and put it down without looking at it. Cole gave her 30 seconds. "We're not done," he said quietly. She looked up. "I know. Carver is a node, not the operation. Vance is still—" "I know, Cole." She held his gaze. "But I needed 30 seconds. He gave her 30 more. Well, he had told Elena about Arthur Vance and the 2013 mission in pieces over the previous weeks. Not everything, but the shape of it. He had told her about the classified route intel, the compromised mission, the 2 men who had died in a situation that shouldn't have happened if the operational security had held. He had told her about the investigation that followed, the inquiry that had concluded without finding the leak's source, the separation from service under a cloud that wasn't accusation exactly, but wasn't clearance either. The kind of outcome that finishes a career without providing the dignity of a charge you can fight. He had not told her who Vance was in relation to that, because he hadn't been certain, and he didn't deal in uncertain accusations. But the Carver documentation and Carver's reaction in the boardroom had closed the last gap. The same entity that had compromised route intelligence in 2013 had been running corporate acquisition operations using the same playbook since at least 2015, and the thread between those 2 facts ran through a man named Arthur Vance, who had never been found, never been charged, and never stopped operating. What Cole needed now was the man himself. He left Maya at the building in the care of a security officer he trusted, a young woman named Torres, who had 3 years on the team and was one of 3 people Cole had identified in the first week as genuinely competent, and drove to a location in Alexandria that Dex had given him that morning along with the corporate traces, saying only, "There's a facility associated with Vance Strategic Holdings in Alexandria. Active lease. Registered as a private research consulting office." It was a 3-story commercial building in an industrial corridor near the waterfront, the kind of building that attracted no particular attention because it was surrounded by similar buildings with similar nondescriptive exteriors. Cole drove past it once, noted the camera positions and the parking configuration and the single visible entrance, and parked 4 blocks away. He called Dex. "Federal contact. How far out?" "They've got Carver in custody. The federal team has the corporate documentation. They're moving on the Alexandria address, but bureaucratic timelines—" Dex paused. "Probably 2 to 3 hours. "That's too long," Cole said. "Cole, do not go in there alone." "I'm not going in. I'm going to make sure no one leaves before the federal team arrives." That's a very fine distinction. It's an accurate one." He ended the call. He sat in the car for a moment and thought about what he was doing with the clear-eyed honesty that he always tried to bring to these assessments, because the version of himself that rushed toward things because they mattered to him personally was the version that had made mistakes in 2013, and he was not interested in being that person again. What he was doing was positioning. He was not going in. He was establishing a perimeter, alone, without backup, in an industrial area near the Alexandria waterfront, to contain a man who had been running sophisticated operations for 14 years and had enough resources to place surveillance on a corporate building across the street for 5 months. This was, objectively, not a conservative choice. He also knew, with equal objectivity, that if Arthur Vance left that building in the next 2 hours, the federal case would pursue him through a paper trail that had been designed specifically to be untraceable. Vance had survived this long because he moved before the walls closed. The moment Carver's arrest hit whatever internal alert system Vance was running, he would move. Cole got out of the car. He approached the building from the east, using the adjacent structure as cover, and found a position in the shadow of a loading dock overhang that gave him a clear view of the building's entrance and the parking area on the south side. He settled in. He was good at this, at the specific discipline of stillness and waiting, the ability to occupy a position without fidgeting, without checking the phone, without letting the mind go to places that weren't useful. He waited 40 minutes. At the 41-minute mark, the building's service entrance opened. Not the main door, the service door on the building's north side, which Cole could not see from his current position. He heard it. The particular sound of a heavy door on a metal frame, the kind of detail you register without knowing you're registering it. He moved. He came around the building's corner in time to see a man in a dark overcoat moving toward a black SUV parked in the service lane. Medium height, 60 or so. Moving with the purposeful efficiency of someone who had done this, evacuated a position more than once. Cole stepped into the service lane and said, "Arthur Vance." The man stopped. He turned. He had a forgettable face, which was probably useful in his line of work. Medium features, nothing that would anchor in memory. But his eyes were something else, pale and precise, and currently engaged in an assessment of Cole that was rapid and experienced. "Mr. Bennett," Vance said. His voice was measured. Not surprised, which was itself a kind of answer. "I wondered when you'd find this address. You know who I am. I've known who you are since you walked into Aurelius's evaluation. A former SEAL with your service record and your," he paused, "specific history, applying to protect Elena Ashcroft. It was either coincidence or something considerably more interesting." He tilted his head. "It was coincidence, wasn't it? You didn't know we were connected." "Not at first. But you found the thread eventually." Vance looked at Cole with something that was not quite admiration, but was in its neighborhood. "You're better than the investigators in 2013 were." "The investigators in 2013 didn't have access to your vendor financial records." Vance almost smiled. "No, they didn't." He looked at the SUV, then back at Cole, making the calculation openly, which meant he'd already made it. "Are you alone?" "Federal team is 20 minutes out." "That's not an answer to my question." "No," Cole said. "It isn't." They looked at each other across 8 feet of service lane in the afternoon light of an Alexandria waterfront, and Cole was aware, with the particular clarity he'd always had in moments where things could go in more than one direction, that this was the kind of moment that defined a long time before and a long time after, and that how he handled it would be a version of who he was that he'd have to live with. "I need you to stay here," Cole said. "When the federal team arrives, you're going to give them a full accounting of the operation. The 2013 mission intelligence compromise, the acquisition plays, the shell companies, all of it. And if I don't? Then you're in a service lane in Alexandria with one exit blocked." Cole kept his voice even. "I'm not going to hurt you. That's not what this is. But I will stay between you and that SUV until the federal team arrives, and everything that happens after that is their jurisdiction." Vance looked at him for a long moment. "You know," he said, "in 2013, the decision to compromise your route intelligence was made on a cost-benefit basis. Your team's mission would have disrupted an operation that had a longer timeline and greater commercial value. It wasn't personal." The ground under Cole didn't shift. He'd expected something like this. The explanation delivered as neutralization, the logic offered as a substitute for accountability. He'd spent some portion of 11 years imagining this conversation, and in every version, he'd been angrier than he was right now. Right now, he felt mostly tired and clear and sure of exactly what he intended to do. "2 men died," Cole said. "Yes," Vance said. "That was a miscalculation in the risk assessment. Their names were David Reese and Thomas Park. Reese had a wife and 2 kids in Pensacola. Park was 26. He'd been on the team for 8 months. Cole paused. "That's not a risk assessment. That's 2 people who aren't here." Vance was quiet. "I want you to understand," Cole said, "that I'm not doing this for me. I'm not doing this because of 2013. I'm doing it because Elena Ashcroft built something real with her own work and you tried to take it from her, and because somewhere along the way you decided that other people's lives were line items in your accounting." He looked at Vance directly. "That's done." Vance looked at him for another moment, and something moved behind the pale, precise eyes that Cole couldn't fully categorize. Then he put his hands in his coat pockets and stepped back from the SUV and stood in the service lane, which was the only answer Cole needed. They waited 17 minutes. The federal vehicles arrived with minimal fuss. No theatrical elements, just 2 dark sedans and 4 agents who moved like people who had done this correctly many times. Cole gave a brief statement. He answered 3 questions. He stepped back and let the process proceed the way process was supposed to proceed when you had done the preliminary work correctly. One of the agents, a woman named Salter, who had the focused manner of someone doing her 4th significant arrest of the week, stopped beside Cole as the other agents walked Vance toward the sedan. "We've been looking for corporate connections to a 2013 military intelligence compromise," she said. "You have documentation?" "Dex Holloway has it. He filed it this morning." Salter nodded. "We'll need your testimony as well, regarding the original mission." "I know," Cole said. "I'll be available." She moved on. Cole stood in the service lane for a moment after the sedans had gone, in the particular quiet that follows significant events, and breathed the waterfront air, which smelled like exhaust and distance, and thought about David Reese and Thomas Park and 11 years of living in the aftermath of a morning he couldn't undo, and whether the thing he'd just done was justice or just the closest available approximation. He decided it was the closest available approximation, which was the only kind that actually existed, and got in his car. The emergency board meeting that reconvened that evening was considerably shorter than the afternoon session. The federal action provided a different kind of context, concrete, externally verified, the kind of institutional weight that made procedural debates feel unnecessary. Fitch presented the board's formal resolution in 40 minutes. Elena Ashcroft's authority as CEO was fully restored. The board expressed confidence in her leadership and directed the executive team to proceed with Helix preparations on the original timeline. Philip Carver's board seat was suspended pending legal proceedings. 2 vendor contracts, including Sentinel Route Advisors, were terminated effective immediately. Elena came down to the 12th floor afterward, where Cole was collecting Maya from the security office. Maya was sitting on a desk chair with her laptop open, working on what appeared to be an actual homework assignment, with the equanimity of a teenager who had processed a significant day and moved on to the next thing while the adults were still processing it. Elena looked at Maya. Maya looked at Elena with the measuring attention she gave to most adults, which was considerable. "You're the CEO," Maya said. "I am," Elena said. "Dad says you built the company from a mid-tier contractor." "More or less." "That's," Maya seemed to be selecting the right word, "significant." Elena almost smiled. Cole could see her working not to fully smile, the way adults did around teenagers who were being simultaneously genuine and slightly formal. "Thank you," she said. She looked at Cole. "The federal team contacted me 20 minutes ago. They have Vance in custody, and they've confirmed the connection to the 2013 military intelligence case." She paused. "They said they'd be pursuing a formal review of the original military inquiry." Cole nodded. He knew what that meant. The process, the timeline, the probability of a formal record correction. He'd been told things like this before, in different contexts, and had learned not to weight them too heavily until they were finished. "Okay," he said. "That's it? Okay?" "I'll believe it when the paperwork exists," Cole said. "Until then, it's a conversation." Elena looked at him. The particular way she looked at him when she was deciding how to say something she intended to say regardless. "You came back," she said, "this afternoon, with Maya. You came back to the meeting." "I said I would." "You said you'd try. There's a difference." She held his gaze. "Cole, what you did today, the documentation, the board presentation, the Alexandria. Harlan told me what you did in that service lane. I stood in a parking lane for 17 minutes. You stopped him from leaving. The federal team stopped him from leaving. I just..." "Don't," Elena said quietly. "You don't have to minimize it. Not with me." The security office was quiet. Maya had put her headphones in, which Cole recognized as a deliberate act of 15-year-old diplomacy. "You have a company to run," Cole said, "and a product unveiling in 38 days. 37, Elena said. "And yes, I do." She looked at him steadily. "And you have... what? A provisional contract that technically expired today when you left the building mid-shift without authorization?" Cole hadn't thought about that. He looked at her. "I'm going to extend the contract," Elena said. "Permanently, if you want it. Full executive security lead. Your terms." She paused. "And for what it's worth, I'm also going to recommend to the Naval Personnel Command that they review your 2013 separation on the basis of new evidence. The federal case will generate documentation that directly supports a formal record correction." Cole looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the paperwork that had ended his career. Not a court-martial, not a formal charge, Just a quiet institutional conclusion that had left him with a separation and no clear answer to any of the questions that mattered. He thought about 11 years of the CRV and the apartment with the broken radiator and the two-bedroom lease and the contract security jobs that paid enough to cover the basics if you were careful. He thought about Maya, who had purchased a burner phone lookup service on a day that would have broken a lesser 15-year-old and had told him to go back. "The permanent contract," Cole said. "I need to think about it." Elena nodded. She had expected this, he could tell. The refusal to commit in the moment, the need for space and deliberate decision, which by now she recognized as simply how he operated. "Take the time you need," she said. She looked at Maya one more time, at this 15-year-old girl sitting in a security office doing homework after one of the stranger days of her young life. And something in Elena's expression was not the CEO and not the crisis manager and not any of the professional things she was extremely good at being. It was something quieter than that, and Cole noticed it and filed it away with the attention he gave to things that mattered. "Good night, Maya," Elena said. Maya pulled one headphone off. "Good night." She looked at Elena with her measuring look. "He'll take the contract," she said. "He just needs to think he decided it himself." Elena did smile then. Fully, briefly, the real one she didn't often deploy in professional settings, and turned and walked out of the security office. Cole looked at his daughter. "You're 15, he said. "You keep saying that," Maya said, and put the headphone back in. He picked up his jacket from the chair and waited while she packed her laptop, and somewhere in the building above them, Elena Ashcroft was riding the elevator back to the 16th floor with 37 days until the most important presentation of her career and a company that was finally fully hers again. In an Alexandria federal facility, Arthur Vance was in a room with 2 agents and a long accounting to make. And in the small security office on the 12th floor of Aurelius Aerospace, a former Navy SEAL with worn-out shoes and a 2009 Honda CR-V and a daughter who was considerably smarter than most adults he'd ever met, stood in the specific quiet of a day that had finally settled, and understood that the weight he'd been carrying for 11 years had not disappeared. That wasn't how weight worked, but that it had shifted into something that could, for the first time in a long time, be called by its right name. Not guilt, not failure, not the shapeless debt he'd owed to 2 men in Pensacola and a life that had ended at 26. Something closer to account rendered, something that felt, if not like an ending, then at least like the place where a different story could begin. The letter arrived on a Thursday, 6 weeks after Arthur Vance was taken into federal custody, in a plain envelope from the Department of the Navy with a return address that Cole recognized before he finished reading the first line. "I was standing at the kitchen counter when he opened it. Maya was at school. The apartment was quiet in the way it was always quiet on Thursday mornings. The radiator had finally been fixed in November, and without its February animal sounds, the place had a stillness that took some getting used to. He read the letter twice, then set it on the counter and poured a cup of coffee, and stood looking out the window at the street below. The letter informed him, in the careful formal language that institutions use when they are correcting something they would prefer not to have to correct, that following a review of new evidence related to the operational security failure of March 14, 2013, the Naval Personnel Command had determined that his separation from service had been issued under circumstances that did not reflect the full factual record. His service record would be amended. His discharge classification would be upgraded. All negative notations related to the 2013 incident would be removed. At the bottom, in a section titled Additional Notes, someone had written by hand, an unusual gesture in a document otherwise composed entirely of institutional language. The record should have read this way 11 years ago. "We're sorry it took this long." Cole didn't know who had written that line. He never found out. But he read it 4 times because it was the kind of sentence that, once you had waited long enough for something like it, landed differently than you expected. Not with the flood of feeling you'd imagined when you rehearsed the moment in your head over the years. More quietly than that. More like the release of something held for so long that the muscles had forgotten they were holding it. He folded the letter. He put it back in the envelope. He put the envelope in the kitchen drawer where he kept things that needed to be kept. Maya's school documents, lease renewal paperwork, the old photograph of his SEAL team taken on a base in Virginia Beach in 2011, which he'd carried without looking at directly for most of the past decade. He took the photograph out and looked at it. David Reese was in the back row, second from the left, grinning in the way he grinned in every photograph, like someone who found the entire situation slightly funnier than everyone else did. Thomas Park was standing next to Cole, 26 years old, 8 months on the team, holding himself with the careful uprightness of someone still earning his place in a room. Cole looked at them for a long time. He thought about what he'd said to Vance in the service lane in Alexandria. Their names were David Reese and Thomas Park, and about how it had felt to say their names out loud to the man responsible, which was not satisfying in any simple way but was necessary in a way that simple satisfaction couldn't reach. He put the photograph back. He put the letter on top of it. Then he finished his coffee and went to work. Okay. The Helix unveiling happened on a Tuesday morning in late November in the main presentation hall of Aurelius Aerospace's headquarters, with 240 invited guests and a live stream that Elena had reluctantly agreed to after her communications director spent 3 weeks making the case that the public narrative around the company needed to be reclaimed, and this was the moment to do it. Cole was in the room, but not on the stage. He was positioned at the back left, near the secondary entrance, which was where the sightlines were best and the exits most manageable. He had rebuilt the security team in the 6 weeks since the board meeting. Not dramatically, not with the theatrical overhaul that new security directors sometimes impose to mark their authority, but steadily, addressing the specific gaps he'd identified in those first weeks. The camera blind spot in the northeast stairwell, the badge reader delay on the service entrance, the patrol rotation gap outside the server room. Damian Rourke was still on the team. This had surprised people, including Rourke himself. Cole had kept him on for 2 reasons. The first was that Rourke was technically skilled. The evaluation where he'd ended up on the mat had demonstrated his limitations in specific areas, not his general incompetence. The second reason was harder to articulate cleanly, and Cole had not tried to articulate it to anyone except himself in the car on a Thursday evening when he was thinking about it directly. There was a version of Damian Rourke that had the potential to become a genuinely excellent protection professional, and Cole had been the man who put him on the floor in front of his colleagues and his CEO, and that meant Cole had some responsibility for what happened to him afterward. You could not humiliate someone publicly and then wash your hands of the result. He'd given Rourke a direct conversation about it 3 weeks in, the kind of conversation that Cole himself had never received from anyone in his career because the culture he'd operated in didn't make space for them. "You're good at the physical work," Cole had told him. "You're fast, you're strong, your tactical assessment scores are in the top 5% of anyone I've evaluated. What you're bad at is listening, and you're bad at it because you've been rewarded for not listening, for going on instinct and physical capability, long enough that it became your whole strategy." Rourke had looked at him with the guarded expression of a man receiving feedback he wasn't sure was a trap. "I'm not telling you this to humiliate you," Cole said. "I'm telling you because the team needs what you're actually good at, and right now you're putting all of it in the wrong order." Rourke was quiet for a moment. "The evaluation," he said. "I shouldn't have—" "No," Cole said. "You shouldn't have. But I also didn't have to put you on the floor to make the point. I could have walked you through what I saw afterward, privately. I chose the version that made an impression on the room." He held Rourke's gaze. "That wasn't entirely fair to you, so we're even." Rourke had looked at him for a long moment with an expression Cole couldn't fully read. Then he'd nodded, a single nod, the kind that means more than it looks like, and they had not discussed it again. In the weeks that followed, Rourke had been one of the most attentive members of the rebuilt team, not performatively, not with the eager overcorrection of someone trying to be noticed improving, but genuinely, in the particular way people change when someone has bothered to tell them something true about themselves without needing anything in return for the telling. Standing in the back left of the presentation hall watching 240 people settle into their seats, Cole could see Rourke at the front right, positioned correctly, watching the room rather than the stage. He looked like a professional. He'd looked like a professional before. Now he looked like one who understood what the job actually required. That was a small thing in the context of everything else. Cole noticed it anyway. Elena walked onto the stage at 9:14 to sustained applause that she received with the particular composure of someone who had learned to accept acknowledgement without either deflecting it or leaning into it too much. She was wearing a dark suit, and she had done something different with her hair that Cole couldn't specifically identify. And she stood at the podium and waited for the room to settle with the patience of someone who knew they had something worth waiting for. She spoke for 40 minutes. Cole listened to about a third of it directly. The rest of his attention was on the room, the entrances, the behavior of the people around him, the security team's positioning. This was the work, and he'd made his peace with the fact that his version of attending an event was not other people's version of attending an event. But he caught the core of what she said, because Elena Ashcroft was a person who meant what she said, and said it without unnecessary ornamentation, which made it easy to follow even while watching a room. She talked about the Helix propulsion system, its efficiency metrics, its commercial applications, the timeline for production development. She talked about what it would mean for the aerospace industry and what it had taken to get it to this stage. She talked about the year, about the challenges the company had faced, without specifying their nature in a way that would invite the kind of questions the communications director had counseled against, but with enough honesty that anyone in the room with full context would understand she was acknowledging them directly. And then she said something that Cole had not heard her rehearse, because she had not rehearsed it, which he understood because he knew how she worked by now. She was the kind of speaker who kept the most important thing in reserve until the moment it was needed. "Every worthwhile thing I've built," she said, "I've built with people who were willing to tell me the truth when it was inconvenient. People who stayed when staying was the harder choice. I want to say, publicly, that this company is stronger than it was a year ago, not because of anything I did alone, but because of what it looks like when people with real competence and real integrity decide that something is worth fighting for." She didn't look at Cole. He hadn't expected her to. The sentiment was not about him specifically, and she was too precise a thinker to make it about him specifically. But it was the kind of thing that, once said in a room of 240 people, settled on the people it was meant for without needing to be directed. Cole looked at the southeast entrance and checked the badge scan log on his earpiece and noted that everything was exactly where it should be. The program that Elena announced in December, formally titled the Aurelius Workforce Reintegration Initiative, was not, she told Cole when she described it to him, named after him. It was named after an idea. The idea that the skills developed in military service and in the difficult work of raising children alone, often simultaneously, often in the aftermath of things that had no clean resolution, were real and valuable and systematically underutilized by an economy that didn't always have the patience to look past a resume that didn't fit a standard template. The program offered 12-month paid fellowships at Aurelius Aerospace, and at 7 partner companies Elena had spent October and November recruiting, with the focused persistence she brought to anything she decided mattered, to veterans and single parents seeking to transition into corporate careers. It covered training, mentorship, and the kind of sustained institutional support that Cole's own entry into the company had conspicuously lacked until Maya had taken matters into her own hands. It was, practically speaking, a good program. Elena had the resources to build it properly and the professional network to make it meaningful and the personal motivation to make sure it didn't become a press release that dissolved into nothing. Cole had seen enough well-intentioned initiatives dissolve into nothing to be a measured skeptic, and when she walked him through the structure, he asked the questions that a skeptic would ask. "What's the failure metric?" he said. "How do you know if it's not working?" Elena looked at him across the conference table where she'd laid out the program documents. 12-month retention rate below 60% triggers a structural review. Employment outcomes at 18 months are benchmarked against industry placement rates for traditional hires. And the mentorship component? Who's running it? "We're building a mentor network from current staff. Voluntary, but voluntary mentorship programs collapse in 18 months, Cole said. People commit, and then their actual workload takes over." "I know. Which is why mentors receive a formal time allocation, 4 hours per month, recognized in their performance evaluations." She held his gaze. "I've done the structural work, Cole. I'm not announcing a feeling. I'm announcing a program." He looked at the documents. The structure was solid. The timelines were realistic. The budget was sufficient without being extravagant, which was the sign of someone who had actually costed the thing rather than aspirationally funded it. "It'll work," he said. Elena set down her pen. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an assessment," Cole said. "From you, that's a compliment." She was right, and they both knew it, so he didn't argue. He told her about the Navy letter on a Friday afternoon in early December, in his office on the 12th floor. Still his office, still small, still without anything on the walls because he'd never gotten around to putting anything up, and had come to feel that the blankness suited the work. She listened without interrupting, which she was better at than most people gave her credit for. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" she said. Cole considered the question with the honesty it deserved, because Elena asking it deserved honesty, and because by December he had developed the habit of trying to be honest with her about things that mattered. "I don't know exactly," he said. "I thought I'd feel more, or differently, like something would close." He looked at the wall. It didn't close, it just changed shape. "Maybe it's not supposed to close," Elena said. "Maybe those two men, what happened to them? Maybe that doesn't close. Maybe it just becomes something you carry differently." Cole looked at her. She said things like this sometimes, direct observations that came from genuine thought rather than comfort-seeking, which was why they landed instead of sliding off. He'd met very few people in his life who could say true things about loss without making it about the saying. "Yeah," he said. "That's about right." Elena nodded. She picked up the coffee she'd brought down. She still came to his office rather than summoning him to the 16th floor, which remained a choice she made consciously and which said something about how she understood the nature of their working relationship. "The record correction, does it change anything practically?" "The VA benefits adjust. There are some pension implications." He paused. "It means Maya's college financial aid picture looks different. That matters." "And for you personally?" Cole thought about the photograph in the kitchen drawer, about the two men in the back row and the young man standing next to him, and the 11 years of carrying the version of the story that said it had been his fault, some of it, some irreducible portion that the record had implied, and that he had incorporated into his understanding of himself so completely that he'd stopped being able to see the boundary between what was true and what was institutional conclusion. "It means I didn't fail them the way I thought I did," he said. "The mission was compromised before we got there. There was nothing I could have done differently that would have changed the outcome." He stopped. "I knew that intellectually. I've known it for years. The letter makes it official." He paused again. "I didn't know official would matter as much as it does." Elena was quiet. She looked at her coffee cup. "Official matters," she said, "because other people said something false about you and put it in a record and left it there for 11 years. And the reason official matters is not because you needed permission to know your own worth. It's because the record belongs to the institution, and correcting it is the institution admitting it was wrong. That's not nothing." She looked at him. "Don't minimize that." Cole didn't say anything. He looked at the wall, which was blank, and thought about the fact that he was sitting in a small office in Richmond, Virginia, with a permanent contract and a rebuilt security team, and a Navy record that finally said what it should have said a decade ago, and that his daughter had used his laptop to submit an application to a company he'd never heard of, and that the chain of events that followed had led here to this particular afternoon, which was unremarkable in every external way and felt, internally, like something he didn't quite have a word for. Not healed, not fixed. Those words were too clean for what the reality was, which was messier and more ongoing and more human than words like that could hold. But different from before. Definitively, undeniably different. And different, in this direction, was enough. He took Maya to dinner that Friday evening, a place she'd been asking about for 2 months, a Vietnamese restaurant in the Phan District with no reservations and a line out the door that they waited in for 35 minutes in the December cold, which Maya filled by telling him about a project she was developing for her computer science class that involved something with network security that Cole followed about 60% of and nodded through the rest of. She was 16 now. She'd had her birthday in October quietly, which was how she preferred it, dinner at home, a cake that Cole had attempted from scratch and that had come out structurally compromised but edible, Maya's assessment being that it tasted better than it looked, which he'd accepted as the highest available praise. 16. He thought sometimes about what 16 had looked like from the other direction, the way time compressed as you watch someone grow through it, the strange double exposure of seeing who they were now and knowing who they'd been at 8, at 11, at the small, serious 4-year-old who had regarded the world with the careful attention she still brought to everything. He was not a man who talked easily about love, not because he didn't feel it, but because the word always felt insufficient for the specific weight of what he meant by it when it came to Maya. But he was aware, standing in a line outside a restaurant in December, that this was the center of everything he'd done and everything he'd protected and everything he intended to build going forward. Not the only center, but the original one. They got a table near the window and ordered too much food, which was the right amount of food, and talked about the computer science project and about a book Maya was reading for English class that she had opinions about and about whether the CRV was going to survive another winter, which was an open question that both of them had been avoiding for 3 months. The Navy letter, Maya said, between the first and second course. She said it the way she said things she'd been waiting to say, directly, without preamble, because she'd found that preambles made her father more guarded, not less. What about it? Cole said. I read it. I know. It was in the kitchen drawer. You left the kitchen drawer open, she said. That's practically an invitation. Cole looked at her. Maya looked back with the expression she wore when she was correct, and both of them knew it. Are you okay? She said. Not the version of the question that people asked when they didn't want an answer, the version that came with actual waiting. Yeah, Cole said. I think I actually am. Maya considered him, the focused assessment that was hers alone, that didn't come from either of her parents, but from some combination of both of them filtered through whatever it was that made her specifically herself. Good, she said. And then, you should fix the kitchen tile. Cole blinked. What? The cracked tile above the stove. You've been meaning to fix it for, I know how long I've been meaning to fix it. Almost 2 years, Maya said. I'm just saying, maybe now is a reasonable time. Cole looked at his daughter, who was 16 and had submitted a job application on his behalf using his laptop, and had bought a burner phone lookup service on a Wednesday when someone had pulled her out of school to use her against her father, and who was now sitting across a restaurant table from him telling him to fix the kitchen tile. There was a form of wisdom in this that was also entirely exasperating and also, if he was being fully honest about it, one of the better things in his life. I'll fix the tile, he said. Maya nodded, satisfied, and reached for the spring rolls. Elena called him on a Saturday evening in late December. Not a work call, because work calls came through the office line, and this came through his personal cell, which she had but rarely used. I know it's a Saturday, she said. It's fine. I wanted to ask you something, and I thought it would be strange to ask at work. A pause. I'm not entirely sure it won't be strange to ask now either. Cole was in the apartment, sitting on the couch with a book he'd been reading in 15-minute increments for 3 weeks. Maya was at a friend's house. The apartment had the Saturday evening quiet that was different from other kinds of quiet. Ask, he said. I want to have dinner, Elena said. Not a working dinner. I don't want to talk about the company or the security protocols or the Helix rollout timeline. I want to have dinner like a person, with another person, and I want that person to be you. Another pause. I'm aware of the professional complexity. I've thought about it. But I've also thought about the fact that the professional complexity is being used as a reason not to do something that I think is worth doing, and I'm not... She stopped. I'm not good at letting that stand without at least saying it directly. Cole held the phone and looked at the wall across from the couch, which also had nothing on it because he'd never gotten around to hanging anything in the living room either. You're asking me to dinner, he said. I'm asking you to dinner, Elena confirmed. I thought about what he'd said at the board meeting 6 weeks ago. All of it, the documentation, the 22-minute presentation. And he thought about Carver's face when the last document went on the table, and about Vance in the service lane saying it wasn't personal, and about a letter from the Department of the Navy in a kitchen drawer under a photograph of men who were gone. He thought about 11 years of living at the minimum required to keep things stable, the discipline of choosing small and safe, because the alternative had cost too much. He thought about what Maya had said in the coffee shop on Mercer Street, sitting across from him with her headphones around her neck. They're weaponizing your greatest fear. And he thought that there was a version of refusal that was prudence, and a version that was just fear with better vocabulary. He'd been good at telling the difference when it involved other people, less so when it involved himself. There's a place in Carytown, he said. My daughter told me it's good. I haven't been. A short silence. Then, Saturday? Saturday works. No security detail, Elena said, and he could hear something in her voice that was lighter than her usual register, something that had room in it. No armored vehicle. No, Cole said. We can walk. Itet. They walked. That was the thing he remembered afterward, and the thing that seemed to contain the most of what the evening was. They walked through the December streets of Carytown with their breath visible in the cold air, and the Christmas lights on the storefronts doing what Christmas lights do, making the ordinary look briefly extraordinary. And they talked the way people talk when they've been circling each other in a professional context for long enough that the first truly unprofessional conversation feels both strange and inevitable. She talked about growing up in Phoenix, about an engineer father who'd taught her to read technical schematics before she could read novels, about the particular loneliness of being the smartest person in a room at an age when that was not an asset. He talked about growing up in eastern Tennessee, about a mother who'd worked double shifts and a father who'd been intermittently present, about choosing the Navy at 19 because it was the most demanding thing available, and demanding things had always felt more honest to him than easier things. She talked about the first time she'd sat in the Aurelia CEO chair 6 years ago, and the specific quality of the silence in the room after the outgoing CEO left, and she was alone with a company that needed things she wasn't sure she could give it. He talked about David Rees and Thomas Park. Not at length, not the way someone talks when they're working through something, but the way someone talks when the thing has finally settled enough to be mentioned without pulling everything else down with it. He said their names. He said that they had been good at the work, and that Rees had this particular habit of making the worst situation seem slightly absurd, which was a skill Cole had never adequately appreciated until it was gone. Elena listened. She didn't offer anything to fill the space after he stopped talking, which was the right response and which he noticed. The restaurant was small and warm and slightly too loud, which was fine because loud rooms required you to lean toward each other to be heard, and leaning toward each other suited the conversation they were having. They ate things Cole couldn't have named afterward because he wasn't paying attention to the food, which was, he recognized, a significant departure from his usual habit of paying attention to everything. He paid attention to Elena Ashcroft instead, to the way she held her fork when she was thinking about something, which was lightly, like she'd forgotten it was there, to the way she laughed, infrequently and genuinely, not the professional laugh she used in meetings, but the real one, which was slightly surprised-sounding, like the funny thing had snuck up on her, to the fact that she was 30 years old and had built something real and had held it together through a coordinated attempt to take it from her, and was sitting across a restaurant table in December with no security detail and no agenda, which for a woman in her position was its own kind of courage. He thought about what it took to trust after something like the past year. Not in the abstract, in the specific practical sense of deciding to sit across from another person in a warm restaurant and tell them true things about yourself. He thought about what it had cost her to call him on a Saturday evening and say the direct thing rather than the managed thing, because managing was what she was best at, and choosing not to manage was a choice she'd made deliberately. He thought that he had spent 11 years deciding that the smaller life was the responsible one, that keeping things manageable was the same as keeping things good. He had been wrong about this in ways he was only now beginning to fully catalog. Not dramatically wrong, not in a way that required throwing everything out, but wrong in the specific way that people are wrong when they confuse protection with living. Maya was 16. She was going to leave for college in 2 years, and her life was going to extend in directions he couldn't predict or control, which was correct and right, and still made something in his chest tighten when he thought about it too directly. He was 37. He had a rebuilt security team and a permanent contract, and a Navy record that finally said the true thing, and a kitchen tile he intended to fix this weekend. Actually, no more delay. He was also sitting in a restaurant in Carytown with a woman who had called him on a Saturday to ask if he wanted to be a person instead of a function for one evening, and who was watching him from across the table with the focused attention she gave to things that she'd decided mattered. "You went quiet," Elena said. "I do that." "I know. I've had 2 months of it." She tilted her head slightly. "What were you thinking about?" Cole looked at her. He considered the various accurate answers and chose the most direct one, which was also the most uncomfortable one, which was, he'd found, almost always the correct choice. "I was thinking that I've been using caution as an excuse for a long time," he said, "and that at a certain point the difference between being careful and being afraid is mostly semantic." Elena looked at him steadily. "And I'm 37, and I'd rather find out what's on the other side of that than keep being careful about it." Outside, the December street moved the way streets move on Saturday evenings. People walking, lights on in restaurant windows, The ordinary, ongoing life of a city that did not know or care about Navy letters or board meetings or service lanes in Alexandria. It was the kind of evening that didn't announce itself as significant. The significant evenings rarely did, Cole had found. They just arrived, ordinary looking, and later you recognized what they had been. He picked up his glass. She picked up hers. "To fixing the tile," he said. Elena looked at him. "I have no idea what that means." "It means starting the thing you've been putting off." He held her gaze. "Long overdue." She understood then. He could see it arrive in her expression, the comprehension of what he was actually saying, which was not about tile, and both of them knew it. She almost said something and then didn't, which was unusual for her, and which told him the moment had weight for her too. She touched her glass to his. "Long overdue," she said. They finished dinner at 10:15 and walked back through the December streets the way they'd come, and the conversation was easier now. The ease that comes after something honest has been said and received. And at the corner where their routes diverged, she stopped and looked at him with the directed attention that was simply how she looked at things that mattered to her. "Good night, Cole," she said. "Good night," he said. She walked toward her car. He watched her go for a moment, not protectively, not with the professional assessment he'd spent 2 months applying to her every movement, just the way you watch someone walk away when you intend to see them again, and both of you know it. He walked to the CR-V. The engine turned over on the second try, which was its usual performance in December. He drove home through the city with the heater running and the radio off, and the particular quality of silence that isn't empty, the kind that has something in it, something that hasn't been named yet, but is taking shape. He thought about the night he'd come home from the evaluation, and Maya had been at the kitchen table pretending not to have been waiting. He thought about the way her face had broken open when he said he got the contract. He thought about every version of himself across the past 11 years. The one who scraped burnt eggs off the pan, the one who checked the same 4 floors of a parking garage every night, the one who had built a small life with great care and called it enough. And he did not dismiss those versions, because they had done the necessary work of keeping him and his daughter upright through a long season of difficulty, and that work deserved its due. But they were not the only version available. He understood that now in a way he hadn't, quite, before. The apartment was quiet when he got home. Maya had left a light on in the kitchen, which she always did when she knew he was coming home late. A small domestic habit she'd developed on her own at some point that he'd never commented on because it would have made her self-conscious about it. He stood in the kitchen for a moment in the warm light, looking at the cracked tile above the stove. He opened the junk drawer. He found the tube of tile adhesive he'd bought 14 months ago and placed in the drawer with genuine intentions and not looked at since. He looked at the crack. It was not a large repair. It was maybe 20 minutes of work if he took his time. He got a chair. He climbed up. He fixed the tile. It took 18 minutes, and when he was done, he stepped back down and looked at the wall, and the repair was solid and slightly imperfect looking and entirely functional, which was more than could be said for the previous state of things, and which was, in his experience, about as much as you could reasonably ask for. He rinsed his hands. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed, and for the first time in longer than he could cleanly remember, he did not lie awake in the dark going through the inventory of things that had gone wrong. He thought instead about the things that had gone right. The list was shorter than the other list. It was also, he decided, sufficient. Outside, the December city continued its ordinary life. Somewhere across town, Elena Ashcroft was probably still awake. She was almost always still awake at this hour, working through something on her laptop or reading technical specifications for the next stage of Helix development, living the ongoing, imperfect, genuinely hers life that no one had managed to take from her. Somewhere in a federal facility, Arthur Vance was accountable for the first time in 14 years. It was not a clean accounting, because clean accountings existed mainly in the stories people told afterward. It was a real accounting, which was harder and slower and more complicated, and ultimately more true. And in a 2-bedroom apartment in Richmond, Virginia, a former Navy SEAL lay in the dark and let the day settle, and thought about a warm restaurant and a December walk, and a woman who had chosen the direct thing over the managed thing on a Saturday evening, and about his daughter who was 16 and going to be fine, more than fine if he was being honest, because she already was, and about David Reese's grin and Thomas Park's careful uprightness and the photograph in the kitchen drawer that he could look at directly now. He thought about all of it, and he let himself feel the full weight of it which was considerable, and which was also, finally, for the first time in a long time, entirely bearable. Some losses don't become okay. They become part of you, and you carry them, and over time you learn to walk normally under the weight. That is not the same as healing, but it is not nothing. It is, in fact, everything. The whole ordinary, remarkable fact of a person continuing and choosing and building and being willing on a December evening with a repaired tile and a light left on in the kitchen to call what they have enough to start from. Cole Bennett closed his eyes. Outside, the city was quiet. Tomorrow would arrive with its own requirements, its own small and large demands, its own version of the work that doesn't end because living doesn't end until it does. He was ready for it. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.